Let's get the view from the Conservative backbenches. Former Cabinet Minister Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me now. Sir Jacob, what did you make of what happened today? You've been critical to some extent of the direction of travel of the government over the last 2 years. What did this manifesto say to you?
It's not the time to be critical. I am a Conservative candidate in a general election. I am supporting what the Conservative Party is setting out and what Rishi Sunak is setting out. And what he's set out is very clear. It is a policy of ensuring that taxes do begin to come down after a period of consolidation, that migration is reduced, both legal and illegal, and that policies are implemented that will help people set up businesses, will reduce the national insurance on the self-employed, will encourage enterprise. This is, I think, really important.
I want you to have a listen to what the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, described this manifesto launch as.
Rishi Sunak said he was the antidote to Liz Truss. Instead, he's cosplaying Liz Truss by, again, doing what the Conservatives did in that mini-budget with, in this case, £71 billion of unfunded commitments. So they're not going to cut national insurance, or if they do, all it's going to mean is £4,800 more on your mortgage.
Now, Sir Jacob, you served in the cabinet of Liz Truss. You knew Liz Truss as Prime Minister. Is this a Trussian manifesto?
I think that comment from the Shadow Chancellor is the sort of thing that gives politics a bad name, that it is so ridiculously overstated. And rather than coming up with a calm and rational discussion about what the Prime Minister has proposed, she goes for some sort of headline on absurd figures and overblown language. I think politics needs a calmer tone of debate, that the proposals are fully costed. I happen to think the savings from reducing the size of civil service could be considerably bigger than the manifesto is suggesting. I think those have been stated extremely conservatively, and that I just don't think it's wise of people who hope to serve in high office to use this rather highfalutin language.
And yet she also used a figure. £4,500 worse off for families. The Labour Party's saying you will cost them £4,500. You're saying they'll cost families £2,000. You're both as bad as each other.
No, I don't think that's true. I think if you look at the costing that the Conservative Party has done, it has taken promises made by shadow ministers and has then got independent bodies, mainly the civil service, to cost them, and that has come up with a total figure. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. The Conservatives have produced a document, I've actually got it here, I printed it off in case we might discuss it, that sets out point by point how much things will cost and where the money will come from to pay for it. Now, the Socialists haven't done that because, as always, the Socialists forget that you eventually run out of other people's money.
And yet this document relies in large part on the hope of efficiency savings, on the hope that fewer people will be claiming benefits, on the hope that there will be crackdown on tax avoidance and evasion. That's just a wish and a prayer, is it not?
Well, it's clearly not, because actually the figure for reduction in non-payment of tax is lower than the government has achieved, and ministers have been pointing this out in interviews. In terms of cost savings within the civil service, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, there was a clear plan to reduce the civil service by 90,000, which would have saved billions of pounds a year. That plan was ready to go. And it's a pity it hasn't happened, and we took on far too many civil servants as a result of COVID. But that excess, that fat in the system, is there for removing. But of course, the Socialists won't do it because they love having a big state. They like employing civil servants who belong to the trade unions that support them.
Well, the evidence might suggest that the current Conservative government quite likes a big state. But I do want to reference a new poll that has come out today showing just 1 percentage point between Nigel Farage's Reform Party and your Conservative Party. You're, of course, down in Somerset campaigning. What do polls like this say to you?
Well, I looked up, because I thought you might ask me about this, the opinion polls in March, April and the very beginning of May 1997 to see if we could learn anything from that. And it's very interesting. They consistently overstated the Labour lead. The Labour lead ended up being 13%, 13%, and so many of the polls had it at well over 20%. So I wouldn't entirely rely on polls, but equally I wouldn't dismiss them.
That's
But I
true,
think
Sir Jacob,
that the
although
lesson-
it did begin to narrow. So you're completely correct. At this point in the electoral cycle...
It didn't. Look, I've got the figures here, actually.
They did begin to narrow.
On the 29th of April, the NOP Reuters poll had a 22% Labour lead. So, no, they didn't really narrow very much. There was a little bit
have a look
of
at
noise.
what they said a week before the election as opposed to a month before the election.
That's
There was
what
a
I was
narrowing.
doing. I gave you just a few days before the election, actually. So
I've been looking at the averages of these polls. There has been a slight tightening in 1997 that we're not yet seeing in 2024.
Right to the end, they were well ahead. Even on the day itself, they were indicating an 18% lead, 18% lead, rather than the 13% lead. So there is something about polling, but there is a key point to make, and that is that if the Conservatives and Reform are very close, what does that tell you about dividing the Tory family? If you divide the Tory family, you make it worse for both parts, the in-laws and the outlaws, so to speak, and that what we need is a coalescence of the various parts of the Tory party family.